Well, right away, you have tea, I have coffee, and that's how we know that we're partners, but we're different people. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Homicide, Life on Repeat, the show where we rewatch, we recap, and we relive arguably the greatest television show of all time, Homicide, Life on the Street. I am Reed Diamond. I play Detective Mike Kellerman on the show, and I am joined, as always, by my partner, Detective Tim Bayless, the very sexy Kyle Secor. Hello, Kyle.
Oh, thank you very much, Rita. Thanks for the sexy part, too. That's
come
nice.
on.
You look very sexy, too.
No, we're holding it together. I don't know why. It's all those monkey glands we're ingesting.
Yeah, the monkey glands started 5 years ago. I did on them.
Oh, yeah. You have to go to Switzerland every few years and just get a brand new infusion. This is exciting. It's our first episode, and we are talking about the first episode. But today, we have the Herculean task of setting the stage for how this show came to be. We have a lot of pipe to lay, don't we?
Oh, we have a lot of pipe to lay, Reed.
We have a lot of pipe to lay. But the first thing I think we really need to talk about is, why are we doing this right now, buddy?
We're doing it right now because Homicide, Life on the Street has dropped on Peacock, and it did so on August 19th. And we're here to give you all of the inside information about the episodes that you are watching right now, or that you hope to watch.
Because we're in very exciting times. Our long national nightmare is over. As the 38th president, Jerry Ford, said, we can finally watch Homicide again, because unless you were fortunate enough to buy one of the iterations of the DVD set, I have two. How many do you have?
I have two. One was the official one. One is probably some sort of a knockoff.
You're the bootleg. Nice. Yeah. He's got a guy off the street. I think it's important to sort of state right out front, we're doing the Homicide version of this podcast. I'm sure there are many, many people, I know many of them, who know infinitely more about the granular details of the dramaturgy of Homicide, Life on the Street. People whose whole writing careers are influenced by being inspired by this show. But what Kyle and I bring to this is we were there. We were actually star employees of the Sausage Factory. We both put on our little hair cover caps and our little white coats, and we made that sausage. Look, there are a lot of people out there who know a heck of a lot more about the dramaturgy of Homicide, Life on the Street, and can break down all of the beats. But here's the deal. We love this show, and we were there. And trust me, we're going to leave a lot of things out. Homicide fans are very passionate and very knowledgeable, and we want to hear about all the things that we mess up and leave out. But what we can bring to this is an insider's view, and we have so much planned for you guys.
So many guests.
So many.
The biggies. The
real biggies. But today we have the Herculean task of telling the Homicide origin story and telling everyone how we got here and how this show that I argue, and I think you would argue, fundamentally changed television, a show ahead of its time, a show with profound reverberations to this very day, how it came to be. But before we even get there, Kyle, I'd like to know a little bit about how you came to be on this show. Right. So let's delight the listeners and maybe the viewers with a tidbit of the Kyle story. Because we've got you here, Detective Tim Bayless.
I feel like we should have some music going in the background on this.
My question for you, Kyle Secor, do you remember your first audition for Homicide, Life on the Street?
I do. Lou DiGiamo, who was a very famous casting director back in the day.
Cast The Godfather.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, he did okay.
Yeah, he did all right.
Yeah. He brought me in for this show, which I didn't want to be brought in for.
The show that you didn't want to be brought in for is Homicide, Life on the Street?
Homicide, Life on the Street. But I saw Tom Fontana's name on there, and I thought, okay, we worked together on St. Elsewhere, and I'll come in to do this. But I was on my way, in my head, to a huge film career. I'd been doing a bunch of films at that point, and it just seemed to me it was pointed that way. It wasn't pointed towards TV, which back in the day you had that luxury.
Well, I think this is a really important moment to pause and set the scene. I think that's what I'll be doing often throughout this podcast, you just hit upon a very important point. In the 90s, in the early 90s, certainly from the 80s and prior, you were either a television actor or you were a film actor, and neither the twain shall meet. I think almost all of us were aspiring to be film actors, but you never saw film actors on television. And in fact, one of the things that makes this show so unique is you had film powerhouses doing TV for the first time, Yaphet and Ned and John Polito. So I just wanted to give a little context about what the world was like back then.
Definitely. And also, you still had those theater holdouts who were just going to do theater.
Yes.
For some weird reason.
I was that jerk. I was that jerk. Yeah. I was just going to do theater until I wanted to eat. And then I needed a few ducats in my pocket so that I could pay the rent. Same thing with film. I'm just going to do movies. So you weren't going to be a TV guy. When you auditioned for Lou, did you audition in Los Angeles?
I did. I auditioned over at, I believe it was 20th Century Fox, maybe.
Was it 20th Century Fox?
It was in Culver City, someplace. So Lou was there, and he had given me. I had the sides for Danny Baldwin's scene with Andre in the parking lot with the Cavaliers.
Okay.
I was doing the Danny Baldwin scene.
Were you auditioning for Beau Felton, or were you?
Who knows?
It was up in the air at that
Could have
point.
been dummy, just sides that they gave to the guys or whatever. But to me, that stuff didn't feel right to me. Didn't feel right for me. But it was a really powerful scene, and I recognized that, and I went and I did it, and I went, okay, that's that. I'm flying off to Germany to do this acting workshop. And ta-ta, so long.
Okay, stop. I have so many questions now. Okay,
Germany acting workshop?
What workshop were you doing in Germany?
There was a teacher at the time in Los Angeles who did very odd acting exercises and acting work named Dominic DeFazio. And he taught over in Italy and Germany, and he got a bunch of his students to head over there.
Give me one example of one of these acting exercises.
Oh, come on, Reed. Okay.
This is what the people are here for. This is how
exactly. So one of the big things was you had a giant beach ball.
Okay.
A giant beach ball. And he would put on...
Right. As many actors do. Go ahead. Yeah.
And by the way, I brought this to Baltimore for the first 2 years I was there.
Of course you did.
Okay. You didn't see it.
Great. Go.
Tell me. Okay, so I have the beach ball. He puts on the music, and you dance with the beach ball. But you can't show up. Only the beach ball can show up. So the beach ball has to be the music. You have to be the music. That's how it was. So to me, I thought we were doing something incredibly important. We weren't going to be doing acting like actions and things like that. We were going to be acting out metaphors. That's what we did. So I showed up. You laugh, but it really worked.
I love it. No, I love it because this is one of the things that makes this show so unique is people came in from all the actors were so unique and special and came from their own point of views, and the characters were so defined because of it. And this could not be a more Kyle Tim Bayliss thing ever than hearing about acting the metaphor with the beach ball. This is fantastic.
Yeah. So how I would transfer that to the acting set read is I would, if I was getting a Coke can out of the machine, I would rehearse it. I would put on my little music things, and I would make the Coke can the music, and it would drop down, and I would be doing this stuff. If someone was watching me from the outside, I would either look incredibly crazy or, oh, he's getting a Coke can. One of those two. But there we go.
This is gold. So at your audition, who was at your first audition in the room?
It was just Lou. It was just Lou.
You were just reading with Lou.
Just reading with Lou, and
I guess you were putting on tape.
He was being put on tape, and he was great. He had me in before for other things, so we knew each other.
And were there other actors in the waiting room that you recognized?
There were other. There must have just been me and another couple of guys, but I didn't know them. And then I took off to Germany, and in Germany I got a call.
Were you in Dusseldorf? Where were you?
No, I was
Germany?
In Darmstadt. Darmstadt, Germany.
The home of metaphorical acting. This is fantastic.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't even know how I got the call because I didn't have a cell phone. I don't think I had a cell phone.
No.
And they said, "Can you come back now?" And I said, "Well, now wait a second. You're asking me to leave my beach balls and my friends and a week early? No, I'm staying here. Besides, I didn't want to do that show."
And they wanted you to come back for a callback?
Yeah, for a callback.
Okay, so what happened? What did you do? Obviously, you went back for the callback.
No, I stayed in Germany.
Did you?
Yeah. And so when I came back, I had to do a number of things there, Reed. I had to finish out the thing, and I had to propose to someone who had to turn me down in the rain, kneeling in a puddle. Then I came back to Los Angeles. Okay. So I'm back in Los Angeles, and they say, hey, they want to have you come in. I said, I thought that thing went away. I don't want to do TV. Just here, come on and do this thing. So I came in again. They said, Fontana will be there. I went, okay, because Tom gave me a great break on St. Elsewhere. And I come in, and I show up, and Lou says, those aren't the sides. There's new sides now. Can you go outside and look at them? I went, for 5, and then come in and read for Tom? Okay, if that's the only way to do it. And because I didn't want to do the show. And it was for this other character named Tim White, which I thought it was right on the nose. And I came into the room, and there's Tom, and there's Barry Levinson.
Yeah.
And I said, am I reading? And he said, no. He said, we'd like to offer you the job.
Get out of
for
here.
this character named Tim White.
Tim White.
And I'm sitting in there knowing I don't want to do the job.
Right.
And then Tom says something that you'll hear later on. So he says to me, in the 6th episode, we're going to do a play. It's going to be 3 men in an interrogation room, and you'll be one of those men. Now, Tom says, and Barry say, that they didn't think of that until midway in the first season. Of that idea. I remember hearing it because that sold me. I went, oh, I'm doing this show. This show is probably going to be too good to be on TV, and it's going to be off after 6 episodes, but I want to do that episode.
Well, that's my favorite part about doing this and having these conversations now is the Rashomon of this whole experience is everyone has a different memory. And then it's nice to see where they line up and where they don't line up, because some things are apocryphal and some things are true.
Right. So a friend of mine named Tommy Hinckley gave me the book, David Simon's book, and said, read this book before you make a decision. I was a chapter into it, and I thought, what is this? What is going on here? And then I went, okay, I'll do it because I don't understand the book. I don't understand anything about cops. But I want to do that episode, so I said yes. That's how it went.
Well, that's a perfect moment to bring up the book because the show, Homicide, Life on the Street, would not be here without David Simon's incredible book, Homicide, A Year on the Killing Streets. So I imagine young Jimmy Olsen, young cub reporter David Simon.
Right?
young David
being
Simon.
Given shit by all of the detectives.
Yes. So if you don't know, and if you haven't read this book, read this book right now. You can listen to the audiobook, which I voiced, but it was abridged. So
wait,
not yes.
Hold on.
What?
Hold on.
Yes.
Wait. You voiced the audiobook. They asked you.
Yes, because we didn't do the audiobook. God, look at you. Like,
No.
You got on the cover of TV Guide on the show you're not watching, and I didn't get on the cover of TV Guide. I just got the audiobook. But it was funny because it was the abridged version. I was doing a lot of audiobooks at the time, and I was such a fan. I tried to do some of the accents too, like some of the Baltimore accents, but I can't. I haven't listened to it since then. And
we must hear some of it.
Well, yes, we'll definitely play some of it at some point. I'm sure David Simon hates my version of it, but he wrote this incredible book. As I say, if you haven't read it, you should read it right away. I've read it multiple times. At the time, off in my little world, I was obsessed with cops and becoming a cop or playing a cop on television, and I read everything there was written about true life detectives or police officers. But this book, nothing comes close to it. And in fact, to this day, every time I play a cop, I reread that book because it was the first sort of romanticized inside view of what it's like to actually be a detective. These incredibly smart, intellectual, savvy, street smart humans who are able to solve these crimes. It went against all of the archetypical TV cop shows. The mythos, if you're coming from the detective genre, is that every case is the most important case, and you're getting it from a confession on the stand, and you're having to find everyone's motives, the Agatha Christie of it all, and that's never it. It's just about the guy falls asleep in the interrogation room, most likely he did it, and crime makes you stupid, which is another theme of this. You get lucky a lot, and then sometimes you don't solve them. So David Simon's book was the inspiration for this television show, and Barry got a hold of the book. Baltimore's favorite son, Barry Levinson, who's directed a couple of movies in his time. Yeah. And originally had thought he was going to make a movie out of it, and then realized, I think we need to tell this on television. And he corralled Paul Addonazio to write the first episode. Is that correct?
Yeah, and Paul and he had worked together before on Quiz Show and a movie called Disclosure. Paul at that time was kind of a big deal. Because I remember seeing his name attached to it and went, wow, okay. That's every iteration that was presented to me it just was more of a wow thing. Oh, Yaphet Kotto. Oh, wow. Oh, Ned Beatty. Wow. John Polito was the biggest wow because I was a huge John Polito fan at the time.
Yeah, as was I. And so after you got offered the job in the room, which is those are actor dream moments. So I assume you didn't have to test or anything like that. It was just a fait accompli, as it were.
Yeah. And I knew that we were going to go there and we were going to shoot 6 episodes, and for me that was it. We were 6 and out, because then the more I was reading the scripts, I realized how good this was and that this had never been on TV before. It seemed like, wow, a great job, and it's going to be short and I'll go back to my film career.
Well, it never had been on TV before, and let's just jump right into it. So this episode is the first episode, Gone for Good, titled Gone for Good. There was no pilot. It was a 6-episode order, so they already knew they were going to make this show.
Yeah.
I think it's a different challenge when you just have to show up and do 6, which is very common now instead of doing a pilot. But back in the day, it was very uncommon not to do a pilot. Usually you did a pilot in January, February, March, and then you got picked up maybe in May, and then you came back in the fall and started shooting. So you're down there, you're doing it. When did you go down there to shoot it?
That I'm not sure of. I believe it was in
leaves are on the trees.
Summer.
So yeah, it looks like the summer. Everyone's sweating.
Summer, late summer.
And so it aired on January 31st, 1993, right after the Super Bowl. And who was in the Super Bowl that year, Kyle?
Well, it was the Dallas Cowboys and the Buffalo Bills, Tom's hometown, and you would
Tom
hope
Fontana.
I mean,
yes.
The wish was that the Buffalo Bills would win, but they did not. They lost 52-17 to the Cowboys. They got slaughtered.
I know nothing about football. I watched it that year just because I was waiting for the game to be over so I could watch the first episode of Homicide. Because
Were you on your own? Were you on your own, or with a group?
Well, I guess I'll tell you this story right now. So on January 31st, 1993, I was making a pilot for NBC. I was in Vancouver, British Columbia, and I was sitting in my room at what now is the Sutton Place Hotel. At the time, it was called the Le Meridian, but it was the hotel where all the actors were, and I was filming a 2-hour pilot for NBC with Jasmine Guy and Al Freeman Jr., who ended up being on Homicide as well. And I was eagerly anticipating this show, and I just sat in my room and I waited for the football game to end, and I waited for Homicide to start. As we'll talk about later, my life changed from that moment on because I was so excited about the pilot and wanted to be on that show more than anything. But as we said, so it aired January 31st, 1993, right after the Super Bowl. It was directed by Barry Levinson, and he won the Emmy for Outstanding Direction of a Drama for that. Yeah. So not too shabby.
Not too
written
shabby.
by
Right
Paul
out of the box.
Addonazio. And we had some pretty exciting guest stars, but let's just jump into it. Now, if we haven't said it already, our motto on the show is don't bore us, get to the chorus. We're not going to take you through every beat of this. There's infinitely smarter, more studious, intellectual types, but we're just going to get to, we're doing the Homicide version. We're going to jump cut all over the place. We're going to do repetition. It doesn't matter if the backgrounds match. Look, establishing a show, doing a first episode, doing a pilot, but let's call it the first episode or pilot. Let's use them interchangeably right now. There's so many challenges. You have to establish what the show's about, who these characters are, and why we should watch it. From the jump, this show is like nothing that had ever been on television before. And I think, if I may, pause a moment again and set the scene. In 1993, all television is really on the 3 major networks: NBC, ABC, CBS. Fox got started in the late 80s, and they had their comedies, but I don't even think X-Files had started yet, and that sort of put them on the drama map. But you basically have 3.5 networks at this time, and that's where all the television is. HBO is maybe making one original show like Arliss or something like that, but there's no basic cable. All these things that we take for granted, there's no streaming, there's no basic cable. So Homicide: Life on the Street is a television show made on a major network that is used to seeing colorful, splashy, and very clearly laid out plot lines. And right away, you are thrust into the world of Homicide: Life on the Street. So you've got 2 guys talking somewhere in an alleyway. And what's that famous line that they're saying that then came back to be in the final episode? Life is a mystery, just accept
Life is
it.
a mystery. Yeah, life is a mystery, which is the same line that they used at the very end of the series. So they just
Exactly.
kind of bookended. Yeah.
What's so exciting is the way we start this show is, first of all, you got two guys talking. They're just talking about life.
We don't even know they're
philosophizing.
detectives yet.
We don't know anything. And
Yeah.
that's my point. So the opening, the teaser of this show is two guys talking. You eventually see that they're at a murder scene and they're standing over a dead body. And what you realize is we're watching a cop show where the dead guy is the least important part of the scene. And then we smash into a title sequence that had never been seen on television before.
Yeah.
So do you want to talk a little bit about the title sequence, Kyle?
A guy by the name of Mark Pellington came up with
Yeah.
the idea for the title sequence. You know, the dog barking, running along the fence is a huge image that haunted so many people. And
Yeah.
the way that the characters are introduced, you just get glimpses of them. It's setting a mood with the music that was created by a woman who had just sent her, a tape in to Barry. And they put that on. That's the sounds that you're hearing. I don't know if you could call it music. It's a bunch of sounds.
Already, we have this first scene with these two. We don't even know the characters' names, right? But, Salami Head, you've got Meldrick and you've got Crissetti there at the murder scene. I should pause right now, too, to say the shooting style of this show. When I watch this show now, 30 years later, it could be on TV today. But at the time, it was so jarring and so un-television. It almost made you seasick when you first looked at it. So they desaturated the color right out the gate as much as you possibly could. It's handheld Super 16 film. And then we cut to a title sequence that is in black and white. As Tom and Barry said, they're trying to do the opposite of Murder, She Wrote. Usually when you go to the title sequence, it's splashy and you've got big, sweeping, sort of romantic close-ups of all the stars. The title sequence is in black and white, which we finally changed in season 5, I believe. Not we changed, NBC changed.
No, you and I got together and we talked about it.
We talked about it. From the jump, we are in a whole new world. We are not in Kansas anymore. We're not talking about the crime. We've got two characters philosophizing, and then we've jumped into this radical title sequence with this found music. Barry had said he was being sent all of these pieces of music that sounded like TV theme songs or music, and that's not what he wanted. But I think this is a great moment to talk about the cast.
Yeah, let's talk about the cast.
We alluded to it earlier. It had never happened before, really, to have a cast of mostly film actors on a television show. So you've got Ned Beatty, arguably one of the greatest actors of all time. Yaphet Kotto, beyond hero of mine, an incredible actor, just unassailable in everything he did in film. And then John Polito. I mean, these guys, right? So you've got these superstars of film. And then you've got Andre, who is up and coming. I'd gone to Juilliard with Andre. Yeah. Yes, and he's got Glory out there. And this guy, I was a spear carrier in his Othello, and so I got to see that every night for months over at Juilliard. My first year was his fourth year. Melissa was someone I'd been watching because I'd seen her in a couple films. She'd been in this William Hurt film. Then you've got Fresh-Faced You, young actor, people you hadn't seen before and people you believed. And right out of the gate, I think what this show did so brilliantly, without explaining anything, but just through dialogue and behavior, you knew who all these people are. So we've got this amazing first teaser scene that sort of sets the mood that we're not on your normal show where it's a murder show, but the murder is the least important thing. These guys are talking about philosophy. And immediately we come into the squad room and we're greeted by a young, fresh-faced newbie, rookie.
Yeah.
Tim Bayliss carrying his box of stuff. And it's a great way for us to be brought into the world. So you've got Kay and Bo sitting at their desk, and just the way they're conversing, their relationship out the bat. And then you have to go find G, and he immediately gives you a quick tour of the world that we're going to be living in the squad room for the next 7 seasons.
Right. He shows me the box. He shows me the fishbowl. Then, interestingly enough, what he leaves out is the observation room. So we see the stuff we see the box, we see the fishbowl where the criminals wait, but what we don't see is what's going on behind the scenes. And they leave that until we see Andre and I in there later on in the scene.
I don't know if you felt this at the time or anyone had articulated this to you, but you're often viewed as the audience's view.
Yeah,
you're the new guy coming in,
right?
And you get to see that world. Then we cut to Bolander and Munch at a hospital interviewing a suspect. But already, what we're doing on this show, and most crime shows, if it's Law and Order, you got one crime. And that's what you're following the whole way through. In this show, we've got 4 distinct storylines going on, which NBC didn't like because they didn't know how to follow it, but they're just telling these stories. And it's a great way to introduce the characters. And so we have this first scene with Ned and Belzer and the great Steve Harris as the bad guy, who just love that guy. Went on to huge success on Practice and many other shows. Do you want to tell the Montel Williams story?
As I recall, that was the scene that Belzer auditioned with.
Right.
For Barry. And Barry said, he's crap. He's not a good actor. And but we like something about him. So let's send him away and see if he comes back with it and it's any better. And it wasn't.
Right. It wasn't.
But Barry hired him anyway because he trusted his instincts, which was right. Because what we see on camera with the Montel Williams scene is brilliant. And Montel Williams was a talk host out of Baltimore. But he was considered a second banana.
Without saying it, we understand that the relationship between Bolander and Munch is that Munch is sort of going through the paces, but Bolander doesn't feel he's quite earned his stripes as a detective. His heart's not 100% into it.
He's not dedicated.
He's not dedicated. So he's letting Munch handle the first conversation with the suspect. And already Munch is feeling insecure. He's like, oh, you think that's Larry King and I'm Montel Williams? I'm not Montel Williams. I know what I'm doing. Yeah. Right? So already that's set up. You already have their dynamic, which is such an important dynamic for this episode. So Bolander is pushing Munch to be his best detective. Now, when you got there, side note, when you got there in Baltimore, did you know any of the other actors?
Clark Johnson.
How did you know Clark?
We knew each other from the YMCA. We played basketball together.
Oh, in Hollywood?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, here's the thing. Clark was an okay basketball player.
Right.
But I played basketball with, like, a lot of college players came there and played. I was a pretty good player. And Clark was a good player, but so we knew each other. And I remember when I saw his picture, I went, oh, that guy. Oh, he's going to be in the show? Okay, that's great. And he showed up, and he was the funniest guy in the cast. He was just such a funny guy. And do you want me to tell you a little memory?
Yes, that's what we're here for.
Okay, so what? Hi. So the second night we were there, we were going to go out to watch a boxing match with all of the cast members. And
wow, where was the boxing match held?
No clue. It was going to be on TV. It was a televised match between. It may have been Tyson. It could have been.
It's got to be Tyson. Yeah.
And so we're all waiting at the bottom of the at the hotel that we were all staying at, and Clark isn't showing up. 10 minutes go by, 15 minutes go by. Danny Baldwin, who had set up the whole thing, went, I think we should just go. And from down the hall, we start hearing, you couldn't make out what it was, but it was an interesting sound. And then as you walk down the hall, you started going, help, help. And so we walk further and further. Then we get to the elevator, and it's much louder now. Help, I'm stuck. And Clark had been stuck in the elevator for about 15 or 20 minutes, and no one had been answering him. We had to wait another few minutes for him to be unstuck from that was our first introduction to Clark.
And that was at Henderson's Wharf?
Yeah, at Henderson's Wharf.
And that's fantastic, where everyone first stays when they get to Baltimore.
First put us up, yeah.
Walk me through you first coming to Baltimore and meeting everyone. What happened? You flew from Los Angeles to Baltimore. Yeah.
Yeah, and we got there, and they had set up a dinner for us someplace. Okay. And we went out to dinner, and then David Simon was there, and he said, I'm going to take you guys on a tour of Baltimore.
This is the night that you guys all first meet?
It was either the night or the night after that. So everyone was there except for Ned Beatty was not there. And he didn't stay at the wharf either. And so David Simon took us out in a van, and he took us to some of the sites of some crimes from the book, drug sales, and he showed us a drug sale that was going on down this alleyway, and he said, watch what happens. A bell rang. And he said, watch this. And then people just were crowding into this alley. Must have been 100 people or more, and we're just watching it going, what is going on? And it was basically the call for 8 balls or whatever it was they were selling. And
8 bells.
8 balls, yeah.
8 bells.
8
I was thinking.
So that was our introduction to the city, was going to these sites with David Simon, who knew very well what was going on out there.
But when's the first time you met the cast?
I think it was that night.
That night? At dinner?
That
so
night,
you guys all show up?
At dinner, yeah.
And do you remember where the dinner was?
It was down in the Inner Harbor. I'm not sure what the restaurant was, but it was
Exactly. There were so many
delicious.
restaurants.
It was seafood.
Seafood, of course. Yeah. Right there from Baltimore Harbor. So we've got this amazing cast. We've got Kyle Secor. We've got Andre Brower. We've got Ned Beatty, John Polito, Danny Baldwin.
Yaphet Kotto.
Yeah, Yaphet Kotto. Richard Belzer. And Clark Johnson. And I think I said Melissa Leo. An amazing cast. So what were your first impressions of everybody when you first got there at dinner? What was it like?
Well, first of all, Yaphet, Ned, and John were...
Right.
I'd seen those guys forever on TV, so it was. I was a little blown away. I wasn't put off by it or anything. I wasn't overwhelmed by it. I just went, "Wow, this is an incredible group of people to have together." Then, when we went out and we were watching what was going on out in the city, it was the first time I would look around and go, "Oh, they're starting to mark their characters. They've already got the book. They already have the script, but now it's actors. A bunch of actors in a van seeing this stuff. They're going to start seeing it as." Maybe how their characters would see it. So I remember taking a moment and looking around the van and just looking, everyone had transformed in that van.
At this dinner, did you meet any of your real life detective counterparts?
I don't think so. The first time I met Tom Pellegrini, who I was based on, was the night that we shot the first time I saw Adina Watson's body lying in the alley. So that's the first time I met him.
You get there and you have this dinner, and then what happens? Do you have any rehearsals, or did you guys go right into shooting?
So I'm kind of thinking we just showed up and started shooting. The shooting schedule, I mean, the actors showed up every single day, and you didn't have a chance to really take a break and get into your trailer or anything. So we were all sort of just out on the streets and talking to each other and never going to our trailers. I don't even know if we had cash chairs. I'm sure we did.
Yeah, you probably didn't. When I got there, season 4, I guess we had cast chairs. We still were in triple banger trailers, and none of them were dedicated to ourselves. Well, I think this is a moment to talk about the shooting style and what this show represented, because it was like making an independent film on television. And I think it's hard nowadays because so many of the techniques that were revolutionized on this show or introduced on this show are now sort of ubiquitous. And in fact, what's hilarious is the whole show was handheld. Super 16 millimeter, sort of shot documentary style, or people always reference Jean-Luc Godard, Breathless. Nowadays, you'll be on a show where you're shooting 35 millimeter cameras and they put some sort of spring on the rig to give it like a handheld look. Yeah. But we were trying to hold it. And who was the DP when you showed up?
Wayne Ewing. And,
Wayne Ewing.
Barry had gotten Wayne because Wayne was a documentary filmmaker, and he had just shot something
on toys.
He had shot something about some crime stuff that had happened. And Barry loved his shooting style, and so he brought him on. Yeah.
Everything's shot on location. Baltimore, as we'll talk about ad infinitum, is a character on this show. The squad room is not a set; it's an actual building. It's the city rec pier.
Yeah, barely revamped.
Yeah. And downstairs, where the garage, where the Cavaliers are, that's where our trailers were, and everything's housed in that building. All of the production office and the costumes were there. It's unusual and very unique to have a practical building and no sets. By shooting in Super 16, it created this opportunity to move quickly and move on the fly, but also it created the lexicon, the language of this show, of the jump cut and the repeat and things not matching and crossing the line, which are things we'll constantly go into in more depth, but had never happened on network television. You know, you're going to see this on HBO, but now it's being invented. You don't have to light a ton for Super 16, so they can go, because you would do multiple locations in a day.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And you're in the real place. You're really in those bars. You're really at the wharf rat. You're really at wherever the crabs are being served. You're on the streets. You're in those alleys. And then, obviously, shooting in the back of the Cavalier, that he's just sitting in the back seat observing. And as Barry and Tom have talked about, directors would be like, well, you can't see his face. They're like, right. Doesn't matter. Or like, hey, we need a transition shot because that background won't match when we cut back to it. And he's like, who cares? And who cares? We'll definitely talk to them about it. How many traditional filmmakers really just balked at breaking the rules? He's like, we're not doing traditional coverage. This is the genius of Barry, too, to come up with this plan for network television. We're not going to shoot the traditional, like, master, over, two-shot, single. We're basically just shooting a ton of masters. How was it explained to you when you got there, and what was it like for you to shoot in that style?
It was incredibly freeing. It was initially a little bit of confusion because we didn't have to match stuff, because you always have to match continuity. You didn't, and you didn't have to. You weren't asked to do that. There wasn't someone watching you and saying you had the pencil in your right hand, and you didn't have to do that. And Wayne took complete control of that, and he took the camera everywhere. So I remember shooting a scene where we were all five of us. There were five of us in a scene, and the director, maybe it was even Wayne who was directing the last episode, said, "Hey, everyone move around your positions now, and I'm going to shoot it like that." And I went, "Wait, we don't have to stand in the same positions?" Right. Okay. And that was incredibly freeing. And that helped in terms of how you related to the other characters, how you related to the camera, because the camera became another character, and that it was going to grab the stuff that you were doing, and you didn't have to necessarily do things that were set.
And what's exciting, too, is when you're doing traditional coverage, you can sort of fall asleep during someone else's close-up. You don't have to show up. But on this, you never know if you're going to be on camera.
Ever. And so it created a very kinetic energy, which I think Tom and Barry were happy with, because we didn't have car chases or gunfights or anything like that. So that was the energy that was replacing those action sequences.
I heard Tom explain it once, or I think he explained it to me while we were doing the show. If you look at a show like Law and Order, everyone's constantly moving. The cliche that still to this day makes me mental. You're being interviewed by a homicide detective, but you keep stacking the boxes as if you're talking to someone about one of the most important things that's ever going to happen in your life, with a person who could put you in jail, but you're going to keep moving, keep doing your job. Right. But on this show, he's like, the camera moves so the actors can stand still. To a modern audience, this seems very current, but at the time, it had never been done before, and it was incredibly radical and jarring. When you first started shooting, how many days do you remember that it took to shoot the first episode?
Maybe 8 or 9, but we settled into, I believe, a 7-day shoot.
7-day shooting schedule.
Yeah, and we didn't deviate from that. We had, Jim Finnerty, who was on top of the crew. And also we could do it in 7 days because we moved so quickly. And they invented all sorts of lighting rigs and camera rigs so that you didn't have
Which
to...
we'll get into in detail for sure. And Jimmy Finnerty's going to have his own episode, I think, where we talk about Jimmy.
Yeah, Jimmy.
When you got there, if you recall, were any of the actors sort of thrown off by the shooting style, or was everyone excited by the energy of it?
Oh, I think everyone took their term of adjustment. So, and some people did it much quicker. I would say probably Clark was, the minute it happened, he knew, I was good with it from what I remember from the get-go. I think Yaphet and Ned have had a bit of a difficulty with it. And for Yaphet, it affected the way he was able to say his lines, because his memorization, it would throw him. And then, but by the end of a few episodes, they got into it as well. But it wasn't what they had been used to for decades shooting.
Right.
Yeah.
The challenges of a first episode or a pilot episode, however you want to refer to it, is you have to establish how everyone is. And normally you say it, but on this one, better to show it than to say it. On this one, they just show it. Yeah. You just see people behaving. So we have Munch and Bolander, and I'm not Montel Williams, and then we're suddenly back in the hospital, and you got Cressetti and Meldrick waiting for their victim to wake up. They're just sitting there, in Harborview Hospital or wherever they are. And that's where Cressetti first introduces his Lincoln assassination, where he's obsessed with how it really went down. You're having these conversations that aren't about plot, because when you're on a regular network show, it's only about plot. You are only in service of telling a story. In fact, oftentimes I'll be on a network show where I go, this could be a radio play. You could literally turn the cameras off and everyone would know what's going on, which was, back in the day, they used to say that was part of the design, because television was so ubiquitous and there was no other, besides radio, there was no other medium. And so people would do the laundry, not do the laundry, they'd do their ironing, I guess, which is part of the laundry. It's a part of the laundry process. But they would do they would do their ironing while the TV's on. So you have to be able, they have to hear what's going on. But on this one, you had to pay attention.
If I could say one little quick thing here, the writers were so good about this. All of the partners were diametrically opposed. Each partner defined the other character. So it was really important that Kay was this perfectionist cop. And then you have Danny Baldwin's character, who was sloppy. He could give or take about certain things, but he was loyal, incredibly loyal, probably far more loyal than Kay was. So there were these different interactions that they had to find each other. And the same you could say for Bolander. Bolander sees in Munch someone who isn't dedicated to the job, and Bolander is highly dedicated to the job.
He's just a poor white boy from Hamden, as he says, but he's got a cops, he's got a police sensibility, and he's trying to get that into Munch. We know who those guys are, and then Kay and Bo, the way they get established is they get the call, and so the phone rings.
God. Yeah.
And the ringing of the phone on this show is another character. It's very important because you know when you pick it up, whoever picks it up is the primary on that case. It means that's their case. That name goes up on the board. We've already seen the board from when G explains it to you, which is very exciting because the board, that's how we know how we're doing. As G says, you know exactly where you stand based on the unsolved cases are in red, and when they go to black, it's solved. So you know where everyone stands. It's like looking at your stats all day long. And those numbers can be harrowing because that's when you pulled that case in for that year.
And another thing is that it was called Life on the Street, not called Death on the Streets. You've got a ton of life going on in these rooms. And the ringing of the phone, you know that's death. And death shows up on a fairly consistent basis in the midst of all of this life.
Well, in the homicide...
God, that was poetic, Reed.
No, it was so poetic. And this is what I love about it. That's what I wanted to point out. Clearly, already out of the gate, we're doing the homicide version of a podcast. So you brought up your gorgeous metaphor, and you also referenced the title of the television show, Homicide, Life on the Street. Now, this might be a nice moment to segue and explain how we got there, because obviously the book was called Homicide, a Year on the Killing Streets. And NBC said no. First of all, killing is too negative. They wanted a positive thing in the title, and they go, a year, that limits us. We want this to run forever. So they compromised, very compromised. They came up with Homicide, Life on the Street. And he said, which is true, and I want to ask you about this. He said, no one's ever going to refer to it as anything but homicide.
Yeah.
What'd you watch last night? Homicide, Life on the Street. I have never referred to it as anything else than homicide. What about you?
Yeah, same with me. If I write about it, I might put it in one time. Or, they call it H-lots.
You said it perfect. I used to get confused all the time. I would see H-lots written. I'm like, what's that? Oh, right. It's the acronym.
Yeah.
As you said, a Life on the Street, and then the phone call is death. Bo goes, are you feeling the magic? Did you feel lucky? She's like, I feel lucky. I got this. And so she picks up, and then we go our first smash cut. We're on the streets of Baltimore. We're seeing the row houses go by. So already Baltimore is an essential character to this show. And once again, to give this a little historical context, shows weren't shot on location back then. Right? It was very rare. You'd shoot them in LA, shoot them only a couple of shows at that time, or in New York or Vancouver, and you'd get a couple of exteriors, or you'd send a second unit out to get some exteriors from whatever town you were supposed to take place in, but you were mostly shot everything in LA.
And I don't think, and by the way, I don't think that there was an establishing shot of the entire town of Baltimore yet. There wasn't that, here we are, we're in Baltimore.
Right.
They established it through the streets and the formstone houses and the Cavalier pulling up. And so we haven't gotten a huge overview of where we're at.
Which, once again, breaking all the rules, but then actually rewriting the rule book. Show it, don't say it.
Yeah.
And then also, as they pull up, you hear the flies over the dead body.
Flies. Did they have a fly wrangler? That's what I want to know. Was there, because there were so many of them.
I couldn't tell how much of the flies were real and how much they were acting them, because once again, we had the best guest stars in the world, and the woman they're interviewing, the whole Davino conversation. Davino is just like Devan. Okay, it's like Chesterfield, and coming up with all the different names for a sofa. Her fly work was excellent.
Unbelievable. And also Baldwin sweating.
Yes.
Actual sweating. So, by the way, again, I believe it was summer that we shot that. It was
and
hot.
Also that they kept it in and he didn't get mopped out. And we'll go into whole things about makeup and all of that as we go along. But what a great way to establish that. And then you guys were at the bar having crabs. There could be nothing more iconic in Baltimore than this. But what that's doing is we're still in the first act and you're setting up Frank Pembleton. He hasn't appeared. So it is an ensemble show, and that's a great question. It's not a great question. Yeah, Reed, you have a great question. My question for you, Kyle, my mediocre question.
I can already tell it's a great question.
It's going to be a great question. Yeah. Was the show presented to all of you as an ensemble show?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I knew that Yaphet, Ned, and John Polito were there, but to me, it only ever was an ensemble show.
So you've got the ensemble. You guys are just playing so well with each other. It's so casual. You're bringing in the mirth and the poetry of it, talking about High Noon and Pride of the Yankees. But no one wants to partner with Frank, and Frank doesn't want to partner with anyone. And you're establishing this man before you see him. It's genius. And we don't see him until the next act. We have a great moment when we come back into the second act after the commercial, and Frank and G are there. I hear you becoming a Yenta.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right.
Because G's pushing him to partner, right? So I guess it's like sort of like Yenta, like a matchmaker kind of thing. I want to work alone. All these sort of great phrases from the book and from real life. So they kick you and you kick me. And he's like, well, now you can kick Felton because he wants him to work with Felton.
Yeah. Or it's not a black thing, it's a blue thing.
It's not a black thing, it's a blue thing, which also brings up, I think is a great moment to talk about this cast that was so diverse. And cynical is the wrong word, but in this day and age, we think a lot about how to make things diverse. This show was profoundly diverse, but just because they picked the best actors for the jobs. Frank Pembleton wasn't designated to be African American character, even though the character he was based on was a black cop, and he knew because he'd had a bad experience on Kojak playing sort of a stereotypical African American character of that time. And arguably, Andre is ostensibly the lead of the show on an ensemble show, and I'm sure we'll talk about that more and more. But Al Girardello, Yaphet Kotto was just the best actor to play Gary Diodario, the head of the squad. So what I love about the show was it was diverse, but it wasn't artificially formed. It was just the best actors were always hired for the job.
Right, and it undercut our expectations of what if we as viewers started developing bias, or they would bring on Andre, who was a button-down polo shirt kind of detective, right? You looked at him and you go, he just came out of Yale or something like this. It was, Melissa also, there was no female detective in the book that she was based on. It was a conglomeration of there was one female detective, but she didn't have that. It wasn't Melissa, it was a black detective. And so the writers and the producers were very clear about bringing on people that weren't just stereotypical, and that they could undercut people's expectations.
Right.
Yeah.
Or
Giardello being Italian.
Well, that's what we're saying. Yeah. Yaphet Kotto is playing an Italian. Yeah. And you have to understand how this had never happened before, because on television, everything was an archetype. You were only writing towards an archetype. Good guy, bad guy. I would argue that prior to Homicide: Life on the Street, there were only two great dramas that were approaching a modern sensibility, and they were both, oddly, on NBC. Hill Street Blues.
Yes.
And then St. Elsewhere.
Favorite.
And St. Elsewhere.
And Tom's Show.
And Tom's Show. I mean, I was such a huge fan of St. Elsewhere, and there were things that I'll never forget, performances in there. But that was sort of the beginning of like, we're making these things, but you have to realize you're making them within the constraints of network television. So what I talk about all the time, and on Homicide, you have to write a cop show where no one can curse. I think most cops could do whole sentences where everything is the F word. That's an interesting challenge. And so we've established Frank as this sort of highly successful but also difficult personality-wise cop. So now we know who he is. And then they temporarily partner him with his clear opposite. Nemesis. And they're downstairs looking through all those Cavaliers. And that's a great story on the Cavaliers. Do you want to tell that Cavalier story?
Yeah, they bought those Cavaliers from the city I don't know what they switched over to, but the city had switched over to some different car.
Ford
and they
Tauruses.
Bought them, Ford Tauruses.
I think so.
And they had bought them for $1. All of these, I don't know how many, it felt like there were hundreds of them. And what Barry said is 2 of them actually worked.
Right.
All of those were a $1 purchase.
And they were so much fun to drive around because they were already banged to hell. And by the time I got there, I just remember everyone was you just drive him into the curb. I remember my first scene with Andre and thinking he would drive it until he found the curve.
Yeah, and that was the scene, that I had auditioned for. That's the scene that I had been given. So it was played so well because you didn't know if Beau was racist.
Right.
From Andre's point of view, from Frank's, he was, but Beau was just like, no, just you're an obsessive compulsive maniac. Just get another car.
And I think that was also one of the magical things already about the writing. We're not having a heavy talk about race in this moment. These guys are bantering. They clearly don't want to work together. And then you come down with Kay. You've come from SWAT. And you've done some rappelling.
Yeah, I've really got it going on. But Beau says, "You've never seen a dead body, have you?" And they're thinking that they're going to have a lot of fun with me seeing my first dead body. However,
we're going to take the rookie to see his first dead guy. They take you to the motel, and that sets the stage for you and Andre becoming partners, correct?
and by the way, I think the hotel may have been the first scene that I shot.
Oh, wow.
And I remember stepping out of whatever van they took me there and going, where's the set? There was no security. There's just people walking around that looked like they were regular hotel, like low rent motel
probably
denizens. Yeah. No, they were the extras, and they were also the actors. Oh,
They were
yeah.
very good.
Yeah, and we went into this hotel or this motel that wasn't cleaned up at all. It was just there.
Well, this is a perfect moment then to bring up how lucky we were. Not only was Baltimore an amazing character just as a physical space, but just having that incredible well of actors and background people. So, I mean, in this episode, there are so many just knock it out of the park. Local guest stars. The gentleman at the cemetery.
Oh my gosh.
Just
Unbelievable. The woman in the scene with the flies.
the woman in the scene with the flies.
The cemetery, whoever he was at the cemetery, unbelievable. And then we'll get to a couple of others, which were just blew me away.
Well, no, let's talk about them right now because there's no
Jerry,
order. Yeah.
It was Jerry Jepson, right?
Yeah, Jerry Jepson.
Holy criminy.
So he's the one who's killed the guy with the Divino. Kay gets him into the box. So you get to see three people in this. The box is obviously a very important place. You get to see Munch very quickly with Steve Harris going, I liked your Jamaican story better. And then Kay gets Jerry Jepson up there because it's going to be a slam dunk for her. This guy is definitely guilty. And he was just so interesting and jittery and nervous that Barry's like, let's just improvise it and let's stay on his face. And so they do all these quick smash cuts of him coming up with these, just digging himself a deeper hole with these terrible excuses.
And amazing of Barry.
Yeah.
Barry threw away everything and said, let's just improvise this. That's a great moment for a director, intuitive moment of what works for this show.
They were magical and they were unique and they were people you hadn't seen before playing these smaller roles. Obviously, the dude at the cemetery is just knocking it out of the park, right? Aunt Calpurnia has killed at least 5 of her husbands, and and it's like what he said. She throws nickels around like manhole covers, meaning she's super cheap. And so they buried him in this styrofoam thing. He's like buried like a hamburger. And he looks thinner, and nobody stays fat down there. Everything he delivers is genius. And then they realize they got the wrong guy. He's buried there. He's like, it happens, and just his delivery was brilliant. And there's even a guy with 2 lines when Bolander goes to the coroner's and he's like, where's the coroner? And he's, you're not supposed to say coroner, sir. And he's
politically correct guard.
And then he goes, well, here at the morgue, he said, don't say morgue, sir. You're supposed to say ME's office, right? And it's just, we're not in Kansas anymore. All of these little touches on the side. And then, then suddenly he's struck by Wendy Hughes, the ME. And you guys were really shooting at the actual coroner's, medical examiner's office.
Oh, yeah. Some of us were okay being there, and then there were people like John Polito.
Right.
Who hated being in there, and it affected the way he acted, which in a very funny way. But for us, we were interested in, well, can you take us back in the cooler and show us some of the bodies? And it was pretty intense.
It's funny because we built that set. That's the only set we built. I mean, it was still practical. It was a real building. We built the morgue nearby the rec center. It's just these little moments. Bolander's all upset that he's absolutely struck by the medical examiner.
And there you go. Bolander's a romantic. So then we
get a romantic.
Completely.
But so we've established all of these characters. We've been introduced to them in really unique ways, and then we get introduced to one of the most. So go ahead.
Wait, we have to bring up someone.
Yeah.
Steiner, Dr. Steiner.
Oh, Shiner.
Ralph Steiner. Come on. We're not going to get the names right all the time.
Not all the time. Bring up Shiner.
Played by Elijah Wood. I'm kidding. Played by a guy.
A young Jake Gyllenhaal.
Ralph Tabakin, who was Barry Levinson's good luck charm. Barry had cast him in 15 movies and TV shows since Steiner, and Ralph was a World War II vet, 2 gold medals, 5 Purple Hearts, and had been in the Battle of the Bulge, and he was there the entire time we did Homicide. What an amazing character.
Well, we're going to have to dedicate a whole segment to Ralph, because Ralph is a special guy. He was Barry's good luck charm, and he always brought this color to this character, because he was his demeanor was...
When we talk to Barry, we can ask Barry about him.
We have to ask Barry all about Shiner.
Yeah.
So we've established the characters, just in such subtle and brilliant and profoundly defined ways. We know these are all individuals, and then we now establish one of the most sort of essential parts of this show is the interrogation in the box and you and Andre and your relationship. And we have our first box scene. They've arrested the hustler who's killed the guy in the motel, played by Alexander Chaplin, who I knew as Sandy Gaberman. Sandy and I went to Juilliard together. He was, I think, maybe a year below me, because Andre was 3 years above me, and I think Sandy was a year below me. But when I went there, he was Alexander Gaberman, Sandy Gaberman, but now he's Alexander Chaplin. But I was like, there's Sandy.
It's a good name change. He was great.
He was great. But then we've got one of the first huge tie-ins to the book. So you guys are in the observation room, and young Sandy, Alexander, young male hustler, is asleep at the desk there in the chair.
And we're observing him from the observation room, looking in through that two-way mirror. We sneaky cops.
You sneaky cops. But it's a truism, and this is one of my favorite lines from the book. It's part of the book I never forget. But they said the suspect is asleep. Rule number 4, a guilty man left alone in the box falls asleep. And that's so true. They said in the book, and I'll never forget this. It was early on, I think, in the book. If you didn't do it, you're going to be like, I didn't do it. But if you're like, yeah, if you did it, you have a different sensibility. But it's such a dead giveaway. He says that thing, which is so great. It's got to be from the book. We're salesmen. But what I'm selling is a long prison term to a client who has no genuine use for the product.
It's great writing.
And then you get to see him in action. Immediately, your relationship is established because he goes in there and in a real sort of police way, he convinces young Sandy Gaberman, Alexander Chaplin, to not ask for a lawyer, that he doesn't need a lawyer. And he gets him to confess that he was the only one there. And
my breakdown of scenes is sometimes a little bit wonky, and I had obviously seen it very differently. But Andre is so specific with his language and with how he breaks down a scene that was the first time I had really seen that at work. And so my reactions to him going, oh, he's leading this guy down a path. Oh, it was, oh my God, that's not, I didn't read it so clearly as Andre did. So that was my reactions. It's really cool to see my response to him, because that was the beginning of our relationship as well. He would always befuddle me.
You throw him this look once he gets him to initial no lawyer, and you're like, what are we doing here? And without saying anything, we know exactly where you are, and it's not spelled out. And you come to the board. We cut back, and you're going, that kid wanted a lawyer.
He wanted a lawyer.
My favorite part is you're earnest and young, idealistic, and you're literally, because we've seen it peppered throughout the Homicide Detective's Practical Handbook.
The second edition. That came out in 1992.
It's the stuff of nightmares, which we'll definitely go into at a different point in depth. But what I love is we see it just subtly in your box when you first show up with G. And now when you're idealistically ranting at Frank, you're gesturing with that book. And you go, the kid wanted a lawyer. And he's like, what is that? What is that? Is that a line from your book, rookie? Stay out of my face. So already we see that you guys are coming at this from two different points of view.
And by the way, at that point, Richard Belzer, who was on set, after the camera turned off, Richard Belzer said, I smell an Emmy. And I thought for an instant he was talking about me, but he was talking about Andre.
Who would eventually get an Emmy.
I thought, it was a really good reaction on my part.
Well deserved. Oh, yeah. Oh, that's gold. Yes.
But it was pretty impressive to see where he was going with that.
And you deserved an Emmy.
Yeah. You know what, Reed? I did. And so did you.
Wow. I don't know about that. But it's very exciting for me to watch these early seasons. I think the hardest part about me watching these early seasons is how badly I want to be there in the scenes with you guys. Every second is magical, but we'll talk about that more.
We'll talk about that.
But what I love, too, is the ending of this episode. Well, it sets up a very important storyline for you, but also it's the show, right? So the phone rings, and there's nothing like that homicide phone ring. You hear it. You know what it means if there's a dead body on the other end of that, and who wants to take it, and whoever's going to take it, it's a gamble. Is it a slam dunk, or is it a red ball cold case that you're never, ever going to be able to solve? And Kay looks at you, and she's like, are you ready to take it? And you pick it up, Detective Bayless.
Yeah.
And then the last line of the episode is, you're finishing that sentence. Homicide. Boom.
And I'll have to say this is that when we were preparing for this, the times that I watch that, every time I pick up the phone, I get choked up.
Tell me why.
Not quite sure, Reed. Because it kicks off a very, very long storyline with Adina Watson. But I think also for me, picking that up that was me committing to the show. That was me committing to the character, committing to the storyline. And I think the emotion is about something about, wow, I was there for all of it.
Yeah.
It's not just like, oh, wow, that's good acting. Nothing like that. No, it's something completely different.
Well, you're thinking about the beach ball.
The beach ball. I had it just if you don't, you can see it. It's just off.
You can see it. It's the beach ball.
Did we talk about the scene with Meldrick and those guys at the end?
Well, let's talk about it. What stood out for you, and what would you most like to talk about?
Well, a couple of things. There is a voiceover early on in the episode with John Munch. Now, I don't recall another voiceover that we ever did where there's something, he's going over it in his head. And Bolander's voice might even come in at that point. The last scene with them drinking outside, talking over being detectives. Meldrick talks about adult diapers, and that's his next big, and you realize, Meldrick he's a hustler. He wants to get a side
He's an
jobs
entrepreneur.
going, which leads to us getting the bar later on in the series. And that they bring up the Madonna photo book because, of course, every guy I knew had the Madonna photo book. We all had it. We had all looked through it many, many times.
If you didn't know, people, Madonna put out a coffee table book in the early 90s, which is shocking. Mostly her naked, humping Dennis Rodman, and lots of very suggestive, lots of fun, naked, sexy stuff.
Yeah,
because she put out that video
with women, and
with everything. Yeah. Oh yeah.
It was a
Genius of
cultural
marketing.
moment. Yeah.
It was a cultural moment. There's two great things. I'm so glad you brought up that scene that I love about that scene. First of all, you got the guys outside drinking and having a conversation, and it's in the rain. And the beauty of the show, because they're shooting Super 16, Barry saw it was raining. They're like, let's do it outside in the rain. So they put the coats on. It also presages so many scenes from The Wire. The Wire is my favorite television show in the world after Homicide, because it always feels to me like everything we couldn't do there that they were able to do with cursing on HBO and stuff like that. But it's that real cop thing of you're just going to drink outside. It's just cheaper to drink in the alley. You're not getting a DUI, and you're just there with your booze in your car, and you're just hanging out and talking. You're seeing the entrepreneurial aspirations of Meldrick. But then also what's really cool is that some local dude comes over to mug him, right?
Yeah.
He shows up to mug him, and which is hilarious. Belzer has a great line. He says, hey, we're police, go rob somebody else. Because he also says Munch has this deep moment in that scene because they're all talking about their philosophies.
Sure.
And Munch says earlier in the scene about who they are, because that's the thing. As Barry and Tom really wanted to explore, it's not about solving the case as much as it is about what dealing with these cases takes out of the humans who have to do it. And he says this thing, in the book, there's always that thing of we're garbage men. We take out the garbage. We do what no one else wants to do. Not meaning that their victims are garbage, but just that we do the job that no one wants to do. But Munch has this great line where he's feeling sort of existential dread about this. He goes, it's like mowing the lawn. He said it's like mowing the lawn, and you got to mow it again. You got to mow it again. And the relentlessness, and it's such a great, in a humorous way, in a very convivial setting, showing the angst and the ennui and the existential crisis of being a homicide detective.
Right, and it connects up, to me, it connects up to all those lines that are spoken through the show of we work for God.
Yeah.
Someone's got to speak for her.
We speak for the dead.
Yeah, it's an existential, almost biblical way of looking at things.
And it's interesting because you've got Bolander, who is on the surface maybe the simplest of the guys, right? Where he says, I'm just a poor white boy from Hamden, but he's got the heart of a police. And he has got that great moment, right, where he finds Munch, who's been working hard. He comes into the lunchroom, he goes, it is with mixed emotions that you have acquired the odor of a dedicated police.
Right. In one episode.
Yes.
In one episode, Munch goes from not being dedicated to being dedicated and getting the respect from the guy that he probably wants the most respect from. Yeah.
Well, what an amazing way to start a series, to break all of the rules, to not pander, to have no familiar signposts. A feature of this, because I don't appear until season 4 of this show, is we'll often ask, what was Reed doing on this day?
May I ask that question?
Please.
Reed, what were you doing on this day?
Well, Kyle, I'll tell you that. I alluded to it earlier. I was waiting for this show to premiere because I was so excited to see it.
Had you read the book?
I hadn't read the book yet at this point. I don't believe so. But I was a huge fan of Andre's, obviously having gone to school with him. And Ned and John, and especially Yaphet, were acting heroes of mine. At the time, which we'll go into more in detail, I had already decided that I wanted to play a cop on TV. I'd almost become a cop in L.A., and I was already deep in my research. And I realized I'm an actor. That's where my skills lie. I had made a solemn vow that I was going to play a cop truthfully on television. So when this show came out, I'm sitting there just waiting for it. I am blown away. I'm sitting in my room at the Le Meridien which became the Sutton Place, the very famous Actors Hotel in Vancouver, and I am just watching it. So blown away because I'd never seen anything like this. The shooting style, the cuts, the handheld, the desaturation. I felt seasick when I watched it, but I sat there in that room, and as it ended, I go, I have to be on this show. And there it is.
There it is. That's pretty awesome. And it's interesting, right? Well, it's interesting you said this. You said, I was seasick watching it. But I would say both of us watching the pilot this time weren't seasick. Something changed.
It's interesting because it didn't quite get the respect from the network at the time, but it changed television forever. And it looks like it could have been made today.
Yeah.
And it's just as relevant. Before you heard the Beatles, you didn't know they existed. And then suddenly rock and roll is part of your lexicon. This show changed television forever, and I think it might have changed us forever.
I think it might have.
And that is why we are here. We've got so much exciting shit for you up ahead. Interviews with everyone you want to hear from.
Shall we say the names? So we say some names?
Yeah, throw some names out there,
all
Kyle.
Right. Let's throw it out there. Tom Fontana.
Who's that? Okay, yeah.
Tom
Fontana.
Barry Levinson.
Heard of him.
Let's see. A couple of guest stars.
Oh, yeah. We're going to hear from everyone on the crew.
Every single person.
You're going to hear from them, but we want to hear from you because, look, I'm sure we missed tons of stuff, things you want to hear about. So we want to know what you hear about. And every week we'll have listener questions, and we will answer your questions as honestly as if you were interrogating us in the box. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please follow, like, subscribe, rate, review. I'm Reed Diamond. I played Detective Mike Kellerman, and you are?
Kyle Secor. I played Detective Tim Bayless.
And we are partners here on Homicide, Life on Repeat.
Yay.
It's an honor to be here with you, buddy.
Yeah, me too. I had such a great time. Yeah.
You're awesome.
I'm so fond of you.
I love you, buddy.
I love you too, man.
All right.
All right.
All right. We'll see you next week.
Take care.